think that there's a very dangerous conflation that circulates in political discourse across countries, across parties, and that is that between culture and immigration. And I say this as a scholar. As a scholar, when one looks at canonical definitions of culture, culture crosses over borders. It's not something static. And this conflation is really problematic, also politically, of course, and also for the progressive cause, because it's an illiberal conflation. It states that an identity and cultures, they're predefined, they cannot be questioned, right? And therefore, this has consequences for culture, because it means that one's culture cannot be questioned, that we cannot push it elsewhere. And it makes sense, you know, when you think about it, when places where women's rights are questioned are also tend to question artistic freedom, right? Because both are in fact questions around, or are groups that question this predefined understanding of who they are, right? And what society is. They're pushing the boundaries, right? Women's rights, LGBTQI plus advocates are saying we can be who we want to be. Society can be something else, right? So first, it's a quick introduction, but the conflation with culture as immigration is extremely problematic. Okay, parenthesis closed. 2 answers to your question on how cultural rights can support the gender equality and a vision for Europe. So first, data shows, I use the singular, sorry fellow academics, I don't use the plural. Data shows that women tend to be cultural consumers. So when you talk about cultural production and artistic production, workers, I'm talking here about cultural workers now. The data shows that women tend to consume culture. They tend to be cultural consumers rather than producers. This is a problem. And it's a problem because it means that the stories that are being told about society, about ourselves, tend to be skewed and limited. I'll give an anecdote, share that. So I live in London. A few months ago, weeks ago, I don't know, I went to a show on expressionism at Tate Modern. I'm not an art historian, but I went there. And this exhibition was on expressionism from the point of view of women. So how women had contributed to expressionism. The show was beautiful. It had these paintings around, you know, people considering the human experience, children, about moments of kindness, about love. It was layered, it was complex. It was a beautiful show, right? Beautiful paintings. And then a few weeks later, I go to Sweden, to the Moderna Museet on work, and I go to an expressionism show as well, only men. Now, I didn't calculate it. I should have calculated it. But I think that at least half of the paintings in that exhibition were of naked women. Now, I'm not a prudish person. I have nothing against. I think the female body is beautiful. But I think it does show that if those who are telling the story, right, and representing and creating images are only men, then we have a more limited understanding of the human experience in those stories. So this is a key problem. And then women, of course, do not see their own experience represented. So this is the first key issue. Second, broadly, so beyond the cultural sector of women as artists and as cultural creators, Andrea said that talking about universities was a career killer, talking about decolonial theory in the cultural sector as well. But I think when the stakes are high, we have to go. Potentially it is, we'll have to see. You know, I work on cultural policy, and namely in how the EU supports culture in foreign affairs. And many of you will know this, in the EU's approach to culture in foreign relations, international cultural relations, it's called, what happens, the key principle is that EU actors, member state actors, local cultural actors will co-create something. This can be an artwork, it can be something else, and they will co-create something together. How? Supporting human rights, namely women's rights and sustainable development. Whenever I present this outside of the EU bubble, I always get the criticism, that's neocolonial. You're supporting human rights outside of the EU, that's neocolonial. And I just found that so problematic. And I tried to find an article that would explain why that was problematic, and I couldn't find it, so I tried to write it. I mean, it was the beginning. So what the chapter tries to say, by engaging with decolonial theory, I'm not a decolonial theorist, I'm a cultural policy person, scholar, but I tried to engage with it. And what I found was that, yes, human rights and women's rights are fully compatible with cultural diversity as discussed, as defined by authors from the Global South. We just have to read it. So, and this is really key because I think that if the EU is to be a feminist foreign entity, hopefully one day, then this is a criticism that will be directed against us, also namely by other illiberal actors, and we need to be able to address it. Quickly on the wokeism. How to address it? So the woke issue, I think one thing that I've seen a lot, and I think that helps, is really to ask what is being said. So can you please define wokeism in another word? And this is not, it's not me who had this idea. I've seen it in other places. Because when someone is asked to define it, then what they'll say is, you are actually supporting diversity. You are a white person who's actually anti-racist. And somehow that is problematic. This is what is being said. So it's a question of the ideas of progressivism, of global justice, of equality, and it's a political attack. And it's a political attack against cultural diversity. And so I think that there are different political strategies or tactics as to how much this is to be mentioned explicitly or not. But I do think that it's important to understand that this is what is happening. Wokeism is really, or the criticism that someone is woke is really one way to say you should not support cultural diversity. How to respond to it? Very quickly. Support artists and cultural workers and women so that they can co-create, be given space to show their work. I mean, again, a quick example. Sometimes even member states in the EU are not at the best place to do this. A quick example, Anatomy of a Fall, this film whose script won an Oscar. The French Comité did not, and it was directed by a woman, did not select it to be a film, to be the French selection in the French election. So, could you do something in that regard? It could not, of course. I'm not saying that it could, but I'm saying that sometimes we need not only to have women, ensure that women are given the space to do their work, but also have an ecosystem that allows them then to across the supply chain be present. And so this is where the EU can help by gathering data. And very quickly, final point. The one issue around that is really connected to wokeism, and I have to mention here, and the cultural sector, that is very problematic is the current, and this connects to what Andrea said as well. There's a current, the privatization of the cultural sector has made it very dependent on private funding. And this has meant that cultural actors, artists, for example, who support clearly Palestine, for example, have had their shows removed or postponed across Europe. This is extremely problematic. And I do not see any action from EU actors in terms of at least trying to monitor what is happening here. Because when we talk about artistic rights, what is usually measured is how many artists are in jail, which is already horrifying. But we're actually not looking at the broader ecosystem. So this broader ecosystem of allowing people and allowing women to express themselves, their political views, is I think really fundamental. So we should do both things to respond to the issue of wokeism. And I finish here. One, question it rhetorically, and two, support cultural diversity. I think that's the answer. And by doing how? By supporting individuals and by supporting institutions.